All right, well, welcome to this episode of First Home Hustle. I'm Kim McCarty.
And I'm Dave Stahl.
Today, we're going to talk about the process of buying your first home. So, we've come up with 14 steps. There's a lot more that are in between the 14 steps, but we're just going to highlight 14.
We might talk about 23 or 24.
Right.
Because there's a lot.
There's a lot of steps. And that's the thing, is that a lot of people don't know that there's a lot of steps that go into buying, selling your real estate. But I think that's what makes us good at our jobs, because we make it look easy. But truth be told, it is not easy.
No.
So let's start with process one. And we have said this over and over and over again. Before you buy anything, you first start with the lender. So you've got to get approved with your lender first. So kind of walk us through that quick process.
And I was thinking about this on my way over about, what is that first step? Where does it begin? And I think for a lot of people, they start thinking, I want to buy a house, I want to buy a house, I want to buy a house, but I don't know where to start.
Right.
And where most people start is, can I afford to buy a house? And then the answer to that is, I have no idea.
Right.
So they start doing search after search online about what's a house payment, what's it cost to buy a house, and really sometimes you'll get good information.
Right, like on a mortgage calculator.
Right, and sometimes you won't, because some people, you're looking at it and going, ooh, that's my mortgage payment, and they forget about taxes, insurance, maybe mortgage insurance, a homeowners association, all this stuff that goes into it. So if you start at that spot of, let's talk to a lender, and even if it's not to get pre-approved right away, but to have an understanding of where am I from a budget perspective? Am I going to look at a 3,500 square foot house, or do I need to really be in a starter house?
Right. And that's one thing that, we've said in the past too, is it's not really about the price. It's more about the payment. Can you afford the payment?
Right.
Because you may qualify for a lot more than you're comfortable paying monthly, because you may have daycare, you may have other things that are out of your budget every month that you need to take into consideration when looking at, can we afford this much house?
Right.
So the first step right then, and I have people who are afraid to talk to a lender because they're like, well, I don't want him to pull my credit. I don't want my credit to be hurt by pulling the credit. Truth be told, it isn't going to hurt your credit. It's any more than anything else you do to your credit, either paying off a loan or not paying off a loan.
Big picture, when you're at the front end of it and trying to make that decision, you need to look at your credit.
Right.
Because what if you make this big decision, ooh, we're going to buy, and then you find something, now you look at your credit then and it's not so great.
Right. And you've got time to work on stuff.
Right. You could have looked at it 6 months ago.
Right.
While you were in that decision-making process of what we're buying and when, so that you could start working on that stuff to make your credit better. I mean, I had somebody referred to me today for that very reason.
Right.
They've got a contract to buy a house. The house isn't going to be done until April. Dave, what do I do to make it so that I'm going to qualify for the best of the best when it's time?
Right. So that's a great plan.
Yeah.
Right. So talk to the lender.
Right. And their credit's not perfect today.
Right.
But with the things that we talked about doing, by the time that they're ready to lock in a rate and all of that, their credit's going to be good enough to be able to qualify for the best of the best.
Awesome. So step 2, we've talked to the lender. We're pre-approved. We know what our budget looks like. So now step 2 is to call an agent and have the agent talk to you about the process of buying that house. Right. So where do you want to be location-wise? What schools are important if you have kids? Work distance. How far do you want to be from work and commute? So all of those things go into talking to that real estate agent, making sure that they understand what your goals are, and making sure that you are on the same page when it comes to what house they're wanting and what their budget looks like.
And we've talked about this before in terms of the interview process of you interviewing the lender, interviewing the agent. And I think part of it is, because I get this all the time, part of it is making sure that both the agent and the lender respect your comfortable budget.
Yes, for sure.
And with that, some reality comes into play of, here's my budget. Okay, you tell me you want to live here, but that's not in your budget. We're gonna have to work around that to make sure you're in the right spot now.
I had that conversation with a good friend who wanted to be at a certain place in the DFW area. which was a very expensive place to be. And I finally just told him, you can't afford to be there. So let's get over it. And let's find a house that fits your budget, that puts you in the best location that we can today with what you can afford, that when you're ready to go to that location, we've got a great piece of real estate to sell. So I always tell people when I'm interviewing with them as buyers and they tell me, oh, we want this or we want that, I always say to them, and this is something that you need to talk to your agent about, their biggest job, other than negotiating the contract for you, is putting you in the best piece of real estate that you can afford. Location-wise, also, I always tell them, I'm looking at resale. They're looking at bright and shiny, right? Oh my gosh, look, it has this or it has that. I'm looking for, does it back up to a major highway? Does it back up to empty land? What's that empty land going to be? So I'm always thinking of the resale, and that to me is the most important part of what I bring to the table, is to educate you on, hey, this deal that you're going to get today may be a deal you give away in 10 years, maybe even more, right? Depending on the market,
right,
and what ends up happening. So definitely the two most important people in this transaction are your lender and your agent, and the lender and the agent having a relationship where they can work well together and make sure they're all on the same page.
And there's a lot of times I talk to people where we talk about what have you seen that might fit the bill,
right? And
they give me a number, and that's the number that I get them pre-qualified for. And because if I don't know their agent yet and I haven't spoken to them, I'll let them know, I'm going to pre-approve you for this. Keep in mind, you can qualify for a lot more, but that's where you told me to start.
Right.
And I'm not telling anybody that but you, unless you want me to.
Right. Right. And I think that starts with the next one is number 3, is starting to look at homes.
Right.
And that's when I think that budget comes into play. Like, we start looking at maybe what they told you they're comfortable with, and we're looking at that and it's not what they want. So then we have those conversations like, okay, if this isn't what you want, we're looking at this price point now. Are you comfortable with that payment? And if they are, then we start there. But I think searching for the properties is always the fun part, right?
Right.
It's always the fun part. And I think it also is the part that can be very frustrating, especially in that first-time homebuyer market. It's a competitive price point. And so sometimes they're disappointed if we don't get it the first time or we're making multiple offers.
And the other thing, when you're looking at the lower priced homes that they got pre-approved for, the way that I know they have a good agent is that before they even go look at them, the agent calls me and goes, Dave, your pre-approval letter says they're approved for X.
Right.
They want to go look at Y. Is that okay?
Yeah. Can we afford that?
Yeah. Can we do it? Because I don't want to go show them something that they're going to get excited about and then they can't qualify to do it. I mean, I've got one right now in South Texas that they originally wanted to get pre-approved for a certain number, and then without even asking me, took their agent to go look at something that was like, 30% higher.
Right.
And then complained that they couldn't find something at their price point that matched. And I'm like,
you can't go look at the more expensive first.
you just added $50,000 to your purchase price, and you're hoping you could find that at your
this
lower
price,
end.
yeah.
It's not there.
No.
So,
and that's an important thing to make sure that you have that conversation with them as the buyer, me as the agent as well, saying,
right.
Listen, if I go show you a $450,000 house, but you can only afford $400,000, I can't make those look the same.
Right.
I just can't. And we're not going to get it for $400,000. So let's just be realistic.
Well, and one other thing, as a lender, I always tell people, before you go look at the list of places you're going to look at, send them to me.
Right.
So that I can pull taxes, insurance, and run numbers for you,
yeah.
so that you know this is what this one's going to be, this is what this one's going to be, and so that if you decide on a Saturday at 8:00 that you're going to submit an offer,
yeah,
you don't have to worry about getting a hold of me to make sure that it's a number that you're
that
okay
you can
with,
afford. Yeah,
because you already know what the number is.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's in that process, knowing that information going in, and some lenders don't want to do that.
Right.
If your lender doesn't want to do that, you might want to find a different one.
For sure. I always like it when we do deals together, because you always figure like at the highest tax rate. Like, okay, we're going to be looking in 3 different cities. Just figure the highest tax rate so that if we end up in that high tax rate city, then we're okay.
Right.
So, okay. So now we found the house. Woohoo, we found it. So step 4 is going to be writing the offer. right? Writing that offer. And hopefully we make the offer good enough that we get chosen if we're in a multiple offer situation. But in selecting an agent, I definitely think you have to have an agent who is really versed on multiple offer situations, especially that first-time home buyer, for sure.
Right.
So definitely talk to your agent and ask the questions. In a multiple offer situation, how do you structure your offer that will set me apart? What do you do to do that? So I think that is an important question as well. So we've got the offer. We've negotiated it. Everybody agrees on it. What's the next step?
Well, you got to make sure that everybody gets a copy of the contract.
And how many times do you think you have to go asking for the copy of the contract because no one has sent it to you?
Well, for me, I do things just a little different. As long as I know who the listing agent is and people share that with me, when your offer gets submitted, I try to call them.
Okay.
To go, hey, I know you've got a letter from me that says that we've verified their income, their assets, their credit, as long as your property works, we're good. But I wanted to call and let you know that. And at that point, I go, do me a favor. As soon as that contract gets executed, so that we don't miss any steps of the process and nothing gets slowed down, can you make sure you send it to me?
Yeah.
So that way, when it comes back to you and it goes to everybody, I'm included in that everybody so that I can pull the trigger and start doing everything I need.
Right. We have a process that, after we execute, and always we end up executing, it seems like, on a Sunday night or something like that. So first thing Monday morning, we're sending out emails to lenders, titles, listing agents, everybody saying, here's the executed contract. But we even take it a step further. We actually spell everything out in a letter that has our letterhead that says, here's the execution date, here's the inspection period, here's this. So there's almost like a one-page, cheat sheet, if you will. And then all of that gets put on calendars so that people know, here's everything.
I love that cheat sheet.
Yeah, it's
important.
important.
I wish more agents did it, because when I get that email from y'all, I see the contract and then I see the other page and I'm like, let's see the other page first. So I know.
So you know all the dates. You don't even have to look at it.
Well, it has everybody's contact information, has title company contact,
emails, everything.
I mean, because typically that purchase contract, it gives you the name of the title company, but it doesn't give you all the contact information. So when agents send that information, helps the lender so much.
Helps out. So now we've sent the contract to title, lender, everyone. You're doing your due diligence, which is basically getting all the extra documents you may need from them, maybe their tax statements if you haven't gotten those or whatever. And your step is to get into underwriting, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you're taking them to underwriting. And what is underwriting? Just a quick little definition of what that is.
Basically, anymore, it's a very simple process. If it's an FHA, VA, rural development, or regular conventional Fannie or Freddie Mac loan, that everything runs through an automated underwriting system. And when you send it to underwriting, you have paychecks, W-2s, tax returns, or what have you, along with asset statements. And as long as the two documents match up, you're good.
Okay.
But most of the time, what you have is loan officers, processors, people who are putting data in the system aren't doing the math, aren't putting the right data in. So now you may have extra steps that you have to do later.
Okay.
Part of what I like to do and what I train loan officers to do is take that extra 5 minutes, because that's really what it is, to look at the W-2s, to look at the pay stubs, and make sure that you calculate the income correctly. Because if you don't, it's going to go to the underwriter, and the underwriter is going to go, you said this, but you have this. Can you prove it?
Yeah.
And now you're like, instead of it just being what it's supposed to be, you got extra steps.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but that's really all it is it's a checklist of, oh, that matches. Oh, that matches. Oh, that matches. And as long as everything matches, and you don't have a bunch of crazy transfers in your account, or you haven't changed jobs 72 times in the last 2 years, it's not a very complex process.
Well, and we're going to do an episode about what not to do when you're under contract, right? We'll do an episode on that, because I think that's an important thing for buyers to know, what not to do while you're under contract trying to buy a house. But we'll do that in another episode. All right. So now everyone's got their stuff. You're doing your job. Well, now it's time for the buyer to do an inspection on the home. And that can always be really scary for the buyers, especially if this is their first house, to do an inspection on the home. But it's a conversation I have up front. Listen, it is the job of the inspector to find everything they can that is wrong with this house.
Right.
And they're going to tell you the good, the bad, the ugly. They're going to tell you all of it. But really what they're going to do is give you a honey-do list. And we've done an inspection interview with one of our inspectors, and he kind of told us the top 5 or 6 things that you look for. So that's what I have those conversations for. So hopefully when we get to the inspection, they're not as scared. And we always say, remember, we already talked about this.
Right.
We're going to go and ask for this. We're going to ask for this. So we negotiate those repairs. Now, what you've trained me to do, which now I've trained all my agents to do, is do not send the request for repairs to the lender. You do not need to see that. You are not a party to that. So if we end up negotiating money, we now split it. So we might do a few repairs and we might do some money in lieu of all other repairs. So we now split it into 2 amendments. You just get the money and the title just gets the money.
Right.
The repairs are between the buyers and the sellers and their agents to make sure it all gets taken care of.
Now, it's important that people understand this timeline,
Okay.
right? So you, over the weekend, you went and looked at a property, you submitted an offer on Saturday night or Sunday night, Monday morning, you have an accepted contract. And how long does it take to get from accepted contract to inspection and repairs negotiated, typically?
Typically 7 days.
7 days. Okay. So,
And that's if we're not in a multiple offer situation. If I'm in a multiple offer situation, I'm going to shorten that window and make it as tight as I can so that maybe the seller is willing to look at our offer over somebody else that wants 10 days, right?
Okay.
So I always think about 7 days, and we have to be completely finished.
well, and that's a good this timeline's important because as a first-time home buyer or any home buyer, that basically means that your first week under contract, don't go on vacation.
Right.
Don't plan anything other than being focused on this.
Right.
Because for me, I know that you're going out looking at the property, doing inspections, negotiating repairs. As the lender, I'm making sure that I have all the documents I need to go into underwriting. I submit to underwriting. I'm typically out of underwriting before you get your inspection done.
Right.
So now the buyer, I mean, it's a whirlwind first week, right?
It is. It is.
The buyer is like, Dave told me I needed this. Dave told me I needed, and it's typically like 3 or 4 things, but it's like,
But it's
bang,
overwhelming.
It's like bang, 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 hurry up and get everything done.
Right.
And then it's hurry up and wait.
Well, but what you and I do is once I get through the inspection and the repairs, then I call you and say, we're good for appraisal. Because we don't want to spend their money before we get all that negotiated.
Unless we have a shortened time frame.
In case we have a shortened time frame. And if appraisals are running long too, if we're in a situation where they're taking a long time. So that would be the next step, order the appraisal. We've made it through the inspections, everybody's happy. Now we're going to order the appraisal.
Right.
So you order the appraisal. Typically, how long does that process take?
If the property is suburban,
Okay.
meaning like around a major metro area, it shouldn't take any more than 5 to 7 days to get the appraisal done and back.
Done and back. Okay.
If it's rural or if it's a unique property, it's going to take a little bit longer and it's going to cost a little bit more.
True.
So, just kind of keep that in mind with where you are. And agents ask me all the time, how long should the contract be?
Right.
Well, where's the property?
Right.
Is it unique? What's the situation? And I can answer that question based upon knowing what the property is and knowing who the borrower is. But most of the time, if it's suburban,
A week.
it's fast.
Okay. All right. So now we've ordered the appraisal. We're waiting for the value to come in. So that's where that hurry up and wait comes in. And so we're just in a holding pattern. And sometimes I feel like if I don't communicate with them daily, sometimes they're like, what's going on? What's going on? Why, so
everything was happening so fast and now there's nothing.
And you haven't even called today. So we have that conversation. So we set those expectations. Listen, it's going to be crazy.
We forgot a step.
Oh, what did we forget?
In that first week, they should be calling for insurance too.
Oh, we did forget that. Yes. Yeah. So that they can have that number for you.
Yeah, because what happens a lot of times is we get down to the end of it. I got everything from the borrowers except for insurance, and they're going, "You never told me about that." Well, yeah, day one I did, but these 7 days,
Yeah,
there's
it's
been
crazy.
a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
you
Okay.
know?
So don't forget to get insurance.
Yeah, insurance. You have to get it. Don't pay for it up front. Pay for it at closing. So when you talk to your agent,
Yeah.
you set it up to be effective for your closing date. I know the contract says on and before, and some people like to close early. That's not a big deal. If it's already set up, they can make it effective sooner.
Okay. All right. So we did forget the insurance
Yep.
part. All right. So now we've got the appraisal order. Now we've got, and hopefully it's made value. We got that back.
Yep.
You're back in underwriting now that everything's been kicked out and all is done. So when I think people get nervous when it comes out of underwriting and maybe there's a few conditions that have to be met, give them just a quick, like, it's not a big deal. Here are a quick few conditions that normally come up.
Well, if we do it in this timeline, we've already addressed those conditions.
Okay.
So at this point, in that first week, for me, I want everything related to the buyer and their finances and their credit and their income I want it all done.
Okay.
So that now all we're worried about is getting the title commitment, getting the survey, getting the appraisal, getting the insurance. And those 4 things are outside of the buyer's control.
Right.
So that they can sit back and relax and just wait for them to come in.
Okay. So
but the conditions, like what you're talking about, we submit the underwriting typically 2 to 3 days later. We have an underwriting approval. Some of the stuff we'll get, and it's not big deal stuff. It's, all right, your borrower gets bonuses. We have to get a written verification of employment from the employer showing, what bonuses they received over the last 2 years. Have they gotten one yet this year? Okay. It's normal that they get it. We can use it to qualify. Overtime, same situation. We might need a letter of explanation about things on the credit report, and people get flipped out about it, but
they do.
Sometimes what happens with creditors, like when you get the little mailer from Citi in your mailbox that says, "Ooh, come get credit with us." Well, they didn't necessarily use your current address on your credit report when they blind pulled it to be able to send you that offer. They might have used your apartment from 3 years ago.
Right.
And now that's updated in your credit report that
You're at the apartment.
You lived there in 2023 when in fact you lived there in 2019.
Right.
It's when people ask for letters of explanation, that's all they're asking for is an explanation as to why is this different than what the credit report says.
Right.
And it's simple. Well, I lived in the apartment from 2017 to 2019. No, I didn't own it. It's just reporting incorrectly.
There you go.
So, and you'll get AKA stuff like, like for me, my last name is Stahl, and on my credit report, I have AKAs for SHTLA.
All different.
Yeah. So even when I spell it to people, they still mess it up.
Yeah.
So, but that stuff like that is what the letters are. Now, sometimes you'll have somebody will have a payroll deduction for something that's weird.
Right.
Because they haven't seen that abbreviation for a payroll deduction. And I would tell you that unless your loan officer says that something's like weird and one-off and we need to really know what's going on with this, I wouldn't be concerned with it because a letter of explanation is merely
Takes care
that.
of it. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've done the appraisal, we've done underwriting, we're sitting waiting. You mentioned title work. So the title work gets done. In that title work, we're just looking if there's liens that need to be paid off and if there's any issues, that will show up on the title work. So that's when we address those. Usually most of those things are related to the seller. It's their loan that they need to pay off if they have any mechanic liens or anything like that. Those things are all taken care of. Sometimes they do have things that pop up. I know I have one that's closing and they had an old loan, and when they refinanced, they paid it off, but it didn't get filed. And so we just had to go back and just get the paperwork to show that it's truly been paid off.
Well, but title also does searches for federal liens and judgments and stuff like that. So you may have a one-off, like if you have a common name like John Smith, and you didn't put your full middle name on the application,
IRS
then it might pop up on title that, hey, John Smith had a judgment.
Yeah.
Are you the same John Smith?
Correct. And we've had to fix those. Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll get stuff like that, but it's not, unless it's you.
Unless you truly are in trouble and you owe the IRS money or something.
There's no need to panic. It's just somebody's going through a checklist and making sure that all the bases are covered and this isn't the same John Smith. Okay,
Right.
we're good.
We're good.
And that, same with the letters. It's not, and I think some of it relates to how it's presented.
Right.
And I know for me, I'll tell people, unless I panic and tell you it's time to panic, you're not allowed to panic.
You can't panic yet.
Because, if you have a good loan officer or a good real estate agent, these little hurdles that come up, that's all they are.
Right.
Is little hurdles along the way that you have to clear to get from wanting to buy a house to buying a house. So,
okay.
But that's important. Don't panic until somebody tells you it's time to panic.
True. All right. So we got the title work. Everything's good. Now we got the survey. So the survey is basically where the house sits on the lot, making sure that everything's good there. If it's in an HOA, that would be another step that we have to get through, making sure that the covenants and restrictions are all things that you can live with. And like one example I always tell buyers is, listen, if you have an RV and we're going into an HOA, got to make sure that RV can be parked in the driveway if that's your plan.
Right.
My guess is it probably can't. So we probably need to look someplace else. But if that's something that you really want to do, then we need to make sure that we're looking over those covenants and restrictions, and that tells you your do's and don'ts for the neighborhood.
And that's important. Look over the covenants and restrictions. Don't call the management company and ask them.
Yeah,
the
right.
covenants and restrictions are what guide you.
Exactly. So that would be another step. So now we've made it through all of those contingencies, the financing, HOA, survey, title work, everything's done. Now what do we get to do?
Pop champagne bottles.
So we have closing. Well, actually, right before closing, we're going to do our final walkthrough. We're going to make sure that the house is in the condition that we expect it to be in. I always set my buyers up. Listen, they're probably not going to do a huge professional clean. It's not going to be like completely clean. So you probably want to hire your own service or be prepared to clean. I always ask my sellers to have it broom swept. Don't leave it trashed, right? But it's definitely not, if it were me moving in, I would want to clean it myself. But final walkthrough to make sure any repairs were done that were in the inspection that we asked for, and that the house is still standing as it needs to stand. And then it's closing day. So,
well, before that, part of the lending process, you're going to get a closing disclosure.
oh, okay.
So there are, and this is part of the process that's confusing to people, that once an appraisal comes in and they have title work, most lenders will send out like a preliminary closing disclosure.
Right.
It's not 100% accurate, but what they're trying to do is meet the federal guideline of you having the closing disclosure 3 days prior to closing.
True.
So the only times that they actually have to send you a new one that's not the final one is if the APR changes or any fees change that are not supposed to change.
Okay.
That's really the only time that they're supposed to send you an updated one. But I know, like my current company, anytime something changes, they send a new one.
Okay.
And you have to acknowledge the new one every time. And I like that because it lets buyers know that we're watching things that are, like your insurance just came in.
Right.
We didn't get it when I asked you for it the first week or the second week.
Right.
We're getting it the week before you're closing. That's got to change on the closing disclosure.
Right.
So, but you should have a finalized closing disclosure 3 days before closing, so that with no changes on it.
So you know what money you need to bring to closing.
Right. And you know exactly what everything is, and you don't get to closing and then understand it then.
Right.
You understand it 3 days ahead.
It's amazing how many times I show up to closing and the lender, if it's clearly not you, hasn't gone over those numbers with the buyer. Now, most of the time you will copy me on that closing disclosure so I can look over it, especially if we've done money in lieu of repairs. I want to make sure that got added because sometimes it's overlooked.
Right.
So it's important for the agent to see those numbers. So there are a lot of lenders that won't send them to me. And I'm like, I really need to see this so I can make sure that we've got the money that we've asked for, make sure everything is correct that we've agreed to.
Right.
But I think that the buyers get nervous about that number. And like you've explained it, sometimes it's not right, but don't freak out. We're going to get it right. But go ahead and sign it so we can start our timeline.
And I'll let you know when it's finalized.
Right. Well, and when a good title company will also review the numbers with them.
Right.
And I do enjoy having a title company go over the numbers because I do think as a first-time home buyer, you're overwhelmed with all of it. And to hear those numbers from somebody else who that's all they do all day, every day, is explain that number, go through it. And if they're really good, then they can put a spin on it that even makes it a little easier to understand. So
and closing is so much easier when that's already been reviewed.
Yes.
And we're here as a formality to sign documents.
To sign some papers and
be
excited about the new house.
I've known about the numbers for a few days. I'm good.
I'm good. I've got my cashier's check. Yeah.
You got my keys?
So we're now closing. We've signed off. In most states, you have to fund, right? And in our state, it happens within an hour or so after everybody has signed.
Yep.
I do know in lots of other states, it takes more time. I know that sometimes it can take a couple days. So we're fortunate in our state, it does not take that long. So we can table fund sometimes within an hour or so. And then they get the keys. So
right.
That's the exciting part. That's the part I like, is getting to take the picture at the end and everybody's happy. And there were no surprises at that time. We don't like surprises on the day of closing. We don't like those kind of surprises. There are a lot of surprises sometimes along the way that maybe are just bumps in the roads they're surprised by, we're not surprised by. Right? So
we forgot another step.
Oh my gosh. I thought we did so good.
Well, like after they get, and I tell them this, like after everything's approved and we're just like waiting for like silly stuff like a survey or something like that, I tell them to start packing.
Oh,
because sometimes they forget.
Yeah.
So much stuff's going on and they're like a couple days away and they're like, oh my God.
Right.
We have to move now.
We haven't even packed. The other thing that we didn't even talk about is transferring utilities into your name. That's another one that
is a big one. Yeah.
And it's part of the process. And we talked about this, is that we came up with 14, 15 steps, but there are so many steps that are behind the scene that they don't know that we're doing behind the scenes, right? We're just calling them, hey, we need this, or hey, we need that. But we're doing a lot of other things behind the scenes. And one of them is sending out emails that says, hey, time to turn on your utilities. Here's what day you need to have them on in your name. Here are the utility companies for that area, or you can shop it or whatever. So that is another step that we do. So I think there's probably hundreds and hundreds of steps to buying a house. But if you have a really good lender and a really good agent, it should feel like there were only like 14 to 20 steps.
And it happens so fast.
And it happens so quickly. Yes. All right. If people want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
They can call me directly. They can follow me on social media. I'm Lone Man in most places, but my phone number is 972-896-8790. How can they get a hold of you?
They can give us a call at 214-662-9308. And remember, if you're looking for real estate anywhere in the country, we can hook you up with the right lender and the right agent.